I don't know whether that's gonna work. Anyway, hi, welcome back to another video, and today's video is gonna be a January wrap-up. Please forgive the noises outside. It's late in the afternoon and a lot of kids are just playing outside right now, so can't really control that. Anyway, January started off not as a very good reading month for me. I think I had a massive slump. I couldn't really read. I was just so distracted. So I was rotating between a few books. I wasn't really finishing anything. And I was reading a lot more magazines and short published books rather than anything that was a bit more substantial, like in terms of how many pages it had. I'm just going to start off this wrap up with the first book that I did read, which was The Ministry for the Future by Stanley Robinson. Okay, it's a bit of a stretch because I finished this a few months, isn't in the last few days of January, but isn't the last few days of December. But I'm going to count it as my January read because I didn't cover it at all in any of my videos, and I thought that I should talk about it because it was a great book. So this is a fiction book that's written by Stanley Robinson, who has written many other books before this that's kind of like climate fiction. But this book in particular was something that I think Naomi Klein talked about, and I really wanted to read it, so I did, and it's massive. It's like a massive book, this thick, and I thought it was a great book. I felt like the author, like Robinson, was really able to capture very realistic scenarios in the future, and it was done very well. Like the world building was done really well. There's just so many things that felt very, very possible, and covered a lot of different topics, like covered geoengineering, covered like the bureaucracy of climate change. It covered, eco-terrorism, things like that, which are all really real things, really real concerns right now. So I really enjoyed the book. I would highly recommend it as a cli-fi fiction if you're interested in that. Definitely a bit far out from my usual read, but I want to read more cli-fi in the upcoming year or in the years ahead, so this was a really good start to that genre. So moving on from that, I did read this book called The Compromise Trap: How to Thrive at Work Without Selling Your Soul by Elizabeth Doty. So context was that I was in the middle of quitting my job, which I have already quit, but I was at my wit's end. I was trying to find any book that would give me advice on how I can survive in the office space without having to feel like I was compromising my own values. So I picked up this book. I didn't really read it in depth. I kind of breezed through it. It has a lot of really, it's not very concise. It just goes on. It's a bit rambly in my opinion. But the main idea was that the compromises that you make, the benefits should outweigh the cost, right? I mean, that's fundamentally what the book is asking you. But one thing that I really learned was that there are a lot of hidden costs to the decisions that you might be making. So you can make all these compromised decisions, but ultimately they're supposed to serve you, and that you have to heavily consider whether there are any hidden costs in those decisions, and whether those costs are worth giving up. I wouldn't really think it's a great book, but the idea was good, and I needed it at that time in my life just to have it, written out in words, like concretely what I could do. And if you're in a position where you are not very sure how to survive in your own office world, you might want to pick up the book. I don't know. It's rambly, not very helpful at times, but it's useful for that particular stage where you feel like you are selling your soul, and you're not sure what to do next. The next book I finished was How to Be an Artist by Saltz. And this was a very pleasant read. It was very easy to read, which I appreciated because I was in a slump, right? So Saltz just kind of, talks you into... It's kind of like a self-help book for creatives. It gave me a lot of comfort because the stories that he chose were, not the most exceptional artists. they were pretty typical. It was all in small chapters, like each chapter was only about like 2 or 3 pages. It was very self-help like, but it was a pleasant read. I think I really liked it for its simplicity and for how easy it was to pick up and just read a few pages at a time. So if you are interested, I guess, in developing your own creative voice, this book might be fun to read. It's not the most like realistic book. It doesn't really teach you like the specifics, but that really depends on where you are at. What it helps is just gives you some friendly advice from someone who is not super extraordinary at, like, not an extraordinary artist, which I think we should read more about. I mean, the arts is so huge, and the commercial art scene is just so kind of like exaggerated sometimes that we don't realize that there are a lot of creatives who are in between and making a living out of the arts that we don't read about. So afterwards, I did read this book called Scripted Culture. Okay, I have no idea how to pronounce the author's name, so they'll be in the description box below. But it's a collection of essays on the digital and the cultural and what makes the public space in today's world. It's heavily jargony. I've had this book for about 2 months because I found it so difficult to read. And it's really, really interesting. I find the points raised very fun. I wouldn't say fun, but very, very intriguing. But it's not easy to read. I have a feeling that it's translated into English. I'm not too sure, but it's definitely like those university type collection of essays, journals, that kind of writing. If you're interested in the specific intersection of culture, public space, digital realms, technology, AI, and the more kind of philosophical aspects of those intersections, this book might be really interesting for you. But I think for a regular reader, I don't think it's the easiest book to get into. So yeah, I think there are other books that achieve the same kind of questions for a more general audience, but this book isn't really that book. I did read this book called White Behind Mental Health Stigma, and it's a independently published book in Singapore. So it's a collection of stories, experiences, resources, but all very specific to Singapore. So if you're watching from abroad, it might not be the most relevant book to read, but in the Singaporean context, it is pretty phenomenal that this book was independently published, because it has a lot of very, very relevant and I guess really relevant stories for today's climate here in Singapore, because mental health is still very much a not talked about topic here, and people still have really strong stigmas around mental health illness, around mental health well-being, etc. So this book is really great. If you're from Singapore and you're watching this video, would highly recommend this video, and if you buy the copy, you'll be really supporting as well these independent publishing efforts. So I think that's many great stones. Wait, what? Many? No, I don't want to use that saying. It's many good things that you achieve with one action. Okay, so after that, I did pick up this really random book called Memoirs of a Malaysian Eco-Activist by Gurmit Singh KS, and it's a really short book. It's about 100 pages, and it's about this activist, called Gurmit Singh, who has done a lot of efforts in the Malaysian context in pushing for climate change policies and all sorts of efforts over there. So the book itself was a bit dry in the sense that it was very, very much just a documentation of his experiences. It was not written in a fun and engaging way, but I did read it just to get a bit more context regionally with regards to climate change. It was helpful for that. I think prior to picking up this book, I did not really know about any sort of like activist figure in Malaysia that would be related to climate change. I think I won't really be recommending the book as it is, but I would recommend reading up about climate change in your own specific context. If you're in Singapore, I would really recommend the book Eating Chili Crab in the Anthropocene. It's a great kind of like overall purview of climate change issues in Singapore. As this book, I think I should probably pick up other memoirs of other climate change activists. It kind of made me think like, oh, do we have memoirs of climate change activists, especially in a regional context? So that was a really cool question that came about after I read this memoir. But it's a really short book, not much to explain other than it really just documenting this person's life story, which was very interesting just by fact alone that this person is a Malaysian eco-activist. So the next book that I read was Vengeance is Mine, All Others Pay Cash by Eka Kurniawan. And yes, it is a fiction book. Eka Kurniawan, I loved his previous work, Beauty is a Wound. It's a fantastic book. I really think that his writing is amazing, and he's an Indonesian author. This book in particular, Vengeance is Mine, All Others Pay Cash, is a really interesting, like funny, action-packed fiction, a bit pulpy, very bawdy, a lot of action scenes, and it's premised upon this young boy's coming of age, as in it follows him until he's like an adult, but it focuses on his earlier trauma and how that kind of impacted his life trajectory. And Kurniawan's writing is just so like in your face, and I appreciated it. I mean, it's very rare for me to read fiction, but Kurniawan really makes his writing so engaging. He doesn't really do commentary. I think he really writes like it's entertaining, and you can read deeper into it if you want to, but he isn't writing to make you rethink like gender and rethink politics, but there are elements of that in his writing. So if you're new to this author, I would strongly recommend Beauty is a Wound. I think I preferred that novel over this one, but this was also quite interesting. It gave me a lot of things to think about actually. Totally not my usual realm of books, but very exciting. Okay, I don't know why I sound so awkward saying that. Yeah, but if you're looking to diversify your reads as well, Kurniawan's writing is one I would strongly recommend. Some disclaimers as well. There are mentions of sexual assault and a lot of graphic descriptions of fighting and gore, violence. Yeah, so be warned. The next book that I read was Raffles Renounced, Towards a Merdeka History, edited by Alfian, Faris, Joraimi, and Xiangyun Lim. This book was sent to me by the publishing house, Ethos Books, and it's an amazing book. I would say it gets a bit dry sometimes. It's essentially a kind of history inquiry book about the role of the role of Raffles as this colonial figure in Singapore today, and that kind of ticks a lot of boxes. What is the colonial legacy in Singapore is a huge topic, and a lot of people don't really think about it, which is kind of funny because a lot of other countries that were colonized in the past, like the whole post-colonial thing, is a huge discussion in a lot of other countries, but it's not a very huge discussion here. And this book, I hope it helps add to that conversation. I hope that more people pick it up and kind of normalize conversations around post-colonial Singapore. So if you don't know already, Singapore was colonized by the British empires back in the day, before the Japanese took over during the occupation, and subsequently the British took it back, but we had kind of independence since 1965. And prior to that we had a short merger with Malaysia as well, so the history is pretty complicated in Singapore, but there are a lot of historical narratives that aren't really written about in local literature, so I'm really glad that there's this title that can add to that. So if you're watching from abroad and you have a deep interest in historical kind of inquiry, especially in colonized, like previously colonized countries or states and nations, you might be interested in picking this book up. But it is very, very, very contextual to Singapore. A lot of references to Singaporean history, and it can be, it's fundamentally an intellectual book. And if you're in Singapore, I would strongly recommend you to get the book or to read it from the library. I believe that it is pretty important to consider your history a bit more seriously, or to engage in a few of these like confrontations with history, especially with regards to the way that history is taught in schools nowadays. I think it's very, very empowering to take charge of your own learning of your own history. So if you're interested in that, do pick up the book. I think they're still selling it on the website. So yeah, awesome. Okay, and the last book that I read in January was In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. I don't know why I didn't read this earlier. I had this book around as a library book for about a few weeks already, but I just finished reading it in the last week of January. And yeah, it's a phenomenal book. I now understand why so many people love Machado's writing. I definitely am a fan now. It's a memoir, but it's kind of a bit of a it's like a memoir, but there is commentary on like queer relationships and dynamics, and you know, the idea of domestic abuse, intimate abuse, all these weird feelings, all these in-betweens. And I think Machado was able to write about it in such a personal yet a critical way, and I really, really enjoyed the book. It really helped me make sense of my own past as well, of my own previous experiences in somewhat of a similar situation. But of course, trigger warnings, it does talk about domestic abuse, it does talk about manipulation, emotional manipulation, etc. But Machado's writing is just so beautiful and incredible. And yeah, I don't know, I am quite new to young female authors, I guess young women authors with a more tender yet critical approach to the personal essay. But I enjoy it greatly. I think nowadays I want to read nonfiction that is also beautiful and creative, not just informational, which I tend to read. So I like this development, I really do. Yeah, and so those are all the books that I read in January. Although it started off a bit difficult, in the end I was able to read some pretty amazing books this month. So I'm really grateful for that. It was a difficult month, like personally, but in terms of the books that I've read, these books gave me so much things to think about and reflect on, and gave me a lot of comfort as well. It gave me a lot of hope that serious issues are being talked about and regarded in such a critical yet like open way, and I really, really appreciate that a lot. So yeah, that is my January wrap up. I don't know whether any of you have read these books. If you have, do comment down below what you thought of them, or if not, what are the books that you might want to pick up after watching this video. And I'm hoping that February will be a really interesting month of reading for me as well. There are a lot of books that I've been switching in and out this past month, which I really want to commit to finishing in February. Yeah, so that's been really fun, and it was really fun to make this video too, because I really, really enjoyed this month of reading. I don't know whether you can tell. But yeah, thanks for watching again. And if you stayed all the way to the end, do comment down below like a book emoji, you know, so that I know that you watched till the end. It's kind of fun to do this. Yeah, so thanks so much again, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with people that you might think would enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram. I have a bookstagram called Nook, and I also have random things around, so you can check that out as well. But yeah, that's about it from me today. I hope you have a good day. If not, I hope you have a good night's rest, and that tomorrow will be a better day. But if not, it's alright as well. I wish you all very well, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye.